coming on to the large scale continuous cultures. Now these large scale continuous cultures or the vessels are largely used at commercial scales. Obviously the laboratory scale uh, continuous cultures vessels are also available, but by and large these are largely used at the commercial scale, and these large scale culture vessels we call them as bioreactors. Now there are certain features or characters of a bioreactor. Now these bioreactors should provide sufficient aeration with a low shear mixing of the suspended cells, because if the mixing rate is high, then it may cause certain mechanical damage to the cells. Then these bioreactors should provide adequate dispersion of the gases throughout the culture media in order to have a proper growth of the cells. They should also provide homogeneous mixing throughout the culture media. They should be easy in handling, and when we talk about easy handling, they should be easy to clean up, they should have long term stability and sterility, they should be easy to scale up, and so on and so forth. These bioreactors should have ability to control temperature, pH and nutrient concentration inside the reactor, inside the media, with high precision. Such reactors should avoid all possible sources of contamination of the culture. Now we talk about different types of bioreactors. Obviously, I will be giving a detailed lecture on bioreactors towards the end of the plant tissue culture lecture series, but briefly I will go through the types of bioreactors. We can divide the types of different bioreactors in three major categories: liquid phase, gas phase and hybrid phase. Now as the name liquid phase indicates, here the cells are continuously submerged in the liquid media and air is sparged in the liquid media for proper aeration. In the gas phase bioreactors, the media is sprayed or is supplied in a form of mist and is largely used for organ cultures like hairy root cultures. Then hybrid bioreactors, as the name hybrid indicates, they can switch between liquid or gas phase reactors as per the requirement of the culture. Now depending upon the usability of the bioreactors, we can have tank bioreactors. As the name tank indicates, the culture vessel in these bioreactors is a large tank, and these tank reactors can be stirred tank where stirring of the media occurs, or bubble column tank reactors where the agitation or stirring of the media is largely done with the help of the bubbles that are formed by sparging the air into the culture vessels. Then we have rotary reactors, bioreactors, wherein the culture media along with the cells is rotated to provide the sufficient amount of stirration or agitation. In tank reactors, we had specific pedals to cause stirration of the culture media, wherein rotary reactors we rotate the entire culture vessel to cause that stirration or aeration. Then we have hairy root culture reactors, which are largely used for hairy root cultures. We discuss mist or spray bioreactors. Then product separation reactors, wherein these type of bioreactors are largely used when we are focusing on a specific product out of that culture, and these reactors help in simultaneous separation of the desired product. Then we have immobilized cell culture reactors, wherein the cells are immobilized in a specific membrane or a specific media, and such kind of immobilization provides a physiological stress on the cells, thereby enhancing the production of secondary metabolites. So here you can, in this diagram, you can clearly see the stir tank bioreactors, wherein the image A represents the stir tank bioreactors. You can clearly see there are pedals which keep on rotating to provide sufficient stir or agitation to the culture media, and simultaneously the air is sparged in the culture vessel, and these bubbles also help in providing the stirration or the agitation of the culture media. Image B is of the bubble column reactor, wherein the only difference is the stirring pedals are absent and the agitation of the media is largely done by the air pressure. The air is passed in the culture vessels and it rises in the form of bubbles, which causes the agitation in the culture media as well as the aeration in the culture media. Another tank reactor is the airlift bioreactor, wherein we have a small culture vessel, culture tube within the tank. Now, the air is sparged from the bottom within this culture tube and the air bubbles rise towards the top. So, as the air bubble rise, they take along them the fresh media from the bottom, and a continuous flow of the media from top to bottom is maintained with the air pressure. Here you can see the diagram of a rotary reactor. As I told you that the rotary reactors, the entire culture vessel is rotated with the help of scoop paddles. Now this rotation of the drum or the culture vessel has to be optimized so that it does not produce excess of mechanical damage to the cells, and it also provide sufficient amount of aeration during the rotation, because you can clearly see there is a fixed tube which act as inlet for the media as well as the air. This is a new type of bioreactor, we call it as a biowave reactor. Now here the culture vessel is made up in the form of bag, which is made up of a plastic, air or gas permeable film, and this culture bag is placed on a rocking platform which keeps on rocking. Now once this bag is put on this rocking platform, as the platform rocks, it creates a wave of culture media within the culture bag, as you can see in the diagram. Now as this wave is produced, it releases the exhausted gases which permeate outside the culture bag, because this plastic film or the membrane is permeable to gases, and because of that concentration gradient, fresh air always enters into the culture bag, and there is a continuous exchange of gases between the environment and the culture bag. This is a biowave reactor. Then a mist bioreactor or a spray bioreactor, wherein the culture media is given to the culturing cells in a form of spray or a mist. Again, the volume to be misted or sprayed has to be optimized. The speed or the intensity or the force by which the media is sprayed has to be optimized in order to prevent any kind of damage to the cells. Next, we have a diagram of product separation reactor. As I told you that wherein we require a specific product, such kind of reactors are used, bioreactors are used, wherein the exhausted media is continuously flowed outside the culture media, and then it enters into a separate chamber where the desired product is separated and the remaining media is, the exhausted media is discarded. This is a product separation reactor. Now we talk about the third type of suspension culture, that is synchronous suspension culture. So as I told you that in synchronous suspension cultures, we try to categorize the cells on the basis of their position in the cell growth cycle, so that we have all the cells in a similar growth phase and we get a synchronous culture. Now such kind of cultures are largely used if you want to study the cell cycle pattern of a particular cell. Now this synchronous or synchronization of the cell growth can be achieved by separating the cells by using physical methods, wherein we separate the cells on the basis of their size. We can also separate the cells by using certain chemical methods, wherein we either starve the cells of a specific nutrient or we add certain inhibitors, cell division inhibitors in the media. Now when we talk about the physical separation methods, as I told you that we can, by using these methods, we separate the cells on the basis of their size. Now this is a basic phenomena that in different growth phases of the cell cycle, the size of the cell will be different. In the earlier phases of the cell cycle, the size of the cell will be small. As we move on to M1, M2 phase, the size of the cell will increase. Now, as the size of the cell increases, we can easily separate by a physical method, that is centrifugation. In this, the cells are centrifugated at a specific velocity, and since the size of the cells is different, the larger cells, which will be heavier than the smaller cells, they will have a higher sedimentation velocity. So, at a particular centrifugal velocity, the cells of a particular size will get sediment, and the smaller size will keep on floating in the suspension. So, we can separate those cells. So, as we further increase the centrifugal velocity, smaller cells will also try to sediment, and depending upon their sizes, depending upon their sedimentation rate, we can separate them. But there are certain limitations of this method. It has been found that it is very difficult to differentiate the cells when they are between G2 and M phases on the basis of their size, and therefore, when we centrifugate the cells, if they are present in G2 and M phase, it is very difficult to get a separate fraction of the cells. Further, we have to centrifugate the cells and then they got sediment. As the cells sediment, they are coming in close proximity to each other, therefore, they get adhere. Again, we have to disintegrate those cells, we have to separate those cells, and then we have to again subject them to the fresh media. Another limitation is if the cells are of non-uniform shape. Now, during the sedimentation, shape of the cells also play an important role. If the cells are of non-uniform shape, then also sometimes it becomes difficult to segregate on the basis of their size using centrifugation method. Another physical method is the filtration method, wherein we filter the suspension through paper or membrane filters of different pore size. So, depending upon the size of the cell, they get separated by the membranes of different pore size, and we get the cells or the fragments having a uniform size, which indicates they belong to a same growth phase of the cell cycle. Coming on to the chemical separation methods, first one is the starvation. As I told you that we remove or we limit the concentration or we starve the cells from a nutrient that is essential for their cell division. Say for example, nitrogen or phosphate, which are essential for cell division in G1 or G2 phase. So, we starve the media or the cells from nitrogen and phosphate, so their cell division stops up to the G1 or G2 phase, and all the cells will stop dividing up to G2 phase. So, we get a synchronized cell culture. Second method is by using inhibitors. Say for example, we use cell division inhibitors like aminouracil or hydroxyurea or thymidine, which allows the cell division only up to G1 phase, and cells get collected up to a G1 and S interface. So, once this inhibitor is removed from the media, again cells will start dividing from G1 or S phase, and we get a synchronous division of cells. Now, we move on that how we determine the growth of cells in the suspension cultures. We have maintained the proper culture, we are using different types of continuous cultures, we are using batch cultures. Now we want to determine what type of growth is there inside the culture. So, there are different methods to determine the growth. First one is the cell counting. Second is determination of total cell volume, or also known as packed cell volume. Then fresh and dry weight of the cells is another parameter that is used to determine the growth of the suspension cultures. And last is the counting the cell colonies. Now, when we talk about the counting of the cells, we all know that as the cells grow in a culture, they keep on dividing. Now, this dividing of cells increases the density of the cells. Cell density is also an important factor when you are initiating a suspension culture. One has to optimize the cell density if you want to have a good suspension culture, and it has been found that 5 into 10 raised to the power 4 cells per ml is an optimum cellular density to initiate a suspension culture. But bottom line again is one has to optimize this density when we are trying to culture different plant, because aggregation or the growth of the cells will vary from plant variety to plant variety. Now, in order to count the cells, we take small amount of suspension from, or the cellular aggregates from the suspension culture, and they are dispersed into single cells by using chromic acid in the range of 5 to 8%, or by using suitable enzymes like pectinase, which dissolve the middle lamella in a concentration of 0.25%, which helps in segregation of the cells into single cells. And once this is achieved, then small amount of this single cell suspension is taken and is placed on hemocytometer, and the cells are counted. Next parameter or method is packed cell volume, which is defined as the volume of a pellet which is obtained after centrifugation of the suspension, and it is largely expressed as the percentage of the volume of the culture used. Say for example, if we have taken 5 ml of the suspension and we centrifugate it, and we get 1 ml and the pellet that is obtained by the cells which sediment, the volume occupied by that pellet is 1 ml. So, packed cell volume will be 20%. So, as I told you, in this we take a volume of uniformly dispersed suspension and we transfer it into a 15 ml centrifugation tube, and this tube is centrifuged at 200 G for 5 minutes, and the pellet that is formed, the volume of that is measured and is also expressed as ml pellet per ml of the culture. Next method is the cell fresh weight method, which is done by weighing the cells in the fresh manner without drying them. So, for this we collect the cells on a pre-weighed circular filter or a nylon fabric or a nylon filter. Then washing of the cells is done with water in order to remove the excess of the media, and then they are exposed, or the excess of media is further removed by draining under vacuum, and then the cells which are retained on the nylon filter are weighed. That represents the cell fresh weight. Again, as the growth of the cells increases, the cell fresh weight also increases. Another parameter is cell dry weight. Again, method is almost similar as that of the fresh weight, wherein the cells are separated on a nylon filter and then they are dried for 12 hours at 60 degrees Celsius, and then they are weighed. Therefore, it is called as a cell dry weight. Again, it is expressed as per culture or per 10 raised to the power 6 cells. Now, you must have observed that in all these methods we have to remove certain volume of the suspension cultures. So, these become invasive methods. There are certain non-invasive method, and the most common one is the Blomm's method. Now, this method depends upon the height of the sediment of the cells that is present in a culture vessel. For this, we take the culture vessel having a suspension culture and we incline that vessel at an angle of 30 to 60 degrees, and every time you take the measurement, the value of the inclination should be same, the angle of inclination should be same. If you started with 30 degree, every time you have to take reading at 30 degree. If you started at 45 degrees, every time you have to take reading at 45 degrees. So, you incline the culture vessel at 30 to 60 degrees angle, and you will see, and you can see in this diagram, that the cells will sediment. The volume or the height of that sediment is recorded. So, as there is higher growth of the cells over the period of time, the height attained by this sediment will increase, and this is how you determine the growth rate of the cells. Now, once you have now you know that the cells are growing, or the growth is not proper. If the growth is not proper, then you again have you try to measure the viability of the cells. There are different methods of determining the viability. First one is the phase contrast microscopy. Second is 2,3,5 triphenyl tetrazolium chloride, that is TTC method. Third is fluorescein diacetate test, or also known as FDA test. And fourth one is the Evans blue method, or Evans blue staining. Now, phased contrast microscopy is nothing but just observing the cellular morphology. We try to determine the presence of healthy nucleus, we try to determine the state of the cytoplasm present in the cell, which helps in determining the viability of the cells using a phased contrast microscope. Then we have TTC method, or 2,3,5 tetraphenyl tetrazolium chloride. Now, in this method we transfer small amount or optimum amount of culture in a centrifuge tube, and then we centrifuge that tube for 1 minute at 9500 G. All the cells will sediment and we discard the supernatant fluid. Now, to those sedimented cells we add 1 ml of TTC solution and we incubate this mixture at room temperature in dark for 12 to 20 hours. Then we observe the after 20 hours we observe it under a compound microscope. Now, this TTC in living cells will get converted into red formazan, and this red formazan will get accumulated in the living cells, because this conversion of TTC into red formazan always occurs in the because of the mitochondrial activity, and this mitochondrial activity will be present obviously in the living cells. So, just to explain, you can clearly see in the diagram, on day 1 of the culture, when the cells were stained with TTC, you will see the amount of the red color in the cells. On day 4, there was a decrease in the intensity of the red color, which indicates now lesser number of cells are viable. And after 1 week, there was a significant decrease in the intensity of the red color, or even the number of the cells which attain the red color. So, this indicates that the cells after 1 week were very much less viable in comparison to day 1 results. Next we have is FDA test, which was first used for animal cells by Rotman and Papermaster in 1966, whereas J. Heslop Harrison and Y. Heslop Harrison used them for plant cells in 1970, when they determined the viability of pollen cells. Now, in this test we use 0.5% of FDA solution, which is prepared in acetone, and that is stored at 0 degrees Celsius, and this solution is added to the cell suspension, optimum volume of the suspension of the cells, and we incubate it for 5 minutes and examine it under fluorescent microscope. Now, this fluorescent diacetate dye is freely permeable to the cell membrane and it easily enters into the cell. Now, once it enters into the cell, it is acted upon by the esterase enzyme, which converts this fluorescent diacetate into a green fluorescein compound. So, as you can clearly see in the diagram, FDA is completely permeable into the plant membrane, enters into the cell, acted upon by esterase enzyme, it degrades into a fluorescein compound. Now, this fluorescein compound is non-permeable to the cell membrane, therefore, it does not move out of the cell and starts getting accumulating inside the cell, and therefore, the cells which have accumulated fluorescein dye, they exhibit a yellowish green fluorescence. Now, since esterase enzyme will be active only in the living cells, therefore, only living cells will be stained, will exhibit or will fluoresce yellowish green in color, whereas the dead cells will not give any kind of fluorescence. There is another approach by which you can use this FDA method, and this is a spectrophotometric method. In this, we mix the cells in with 10 microliter of FDA dye solution and incubate for 15 minutes at room temperature. Then we adjust this volume to 4 ml with distilled water and again centrifuge at a specified speed for 5 minutes. We resuspend the pellet in 1 ml of 50 millimolar phosphate buffer at pH 7.5 and then we freeze quickly in liquid nitrogen. This frozen material is then thawed and diluted with 3 ml of phosphate buffer, again homogenized for 10 seconds at specified period of time and at a specified speed. Then this sample is again diluted, 100 microliter of this sample is diluted with 2 ml of the phosphate buffer, and then the fluorescence is measured at 516 nanometer using 492 extension beam. Now, if the cells are viable, the number of viable cell if is high, then the absorbance will also be high. Another method is the Evans blue staining method, which was discovered in 1914 by Herbert and McLean Evans. Now, this Evans blue dye is always taken up by the damaged cells or where the membrane is damaged. So, we can say that Evans blue dye is non-permeable to the cellular membrane. So, only those cells which are damaged or their cell membrane is not intact, they attain this blue color. So, for this we treat the cells with 0.025% of the Evans blue solution and the damaged cells will attain the blue color, whereas the viable cell will exclude or they will remain colorless. So, higher the number of colorless cells will indicate the higher percentage of viable cells in the culture. Now, this method can also be used as an assay wherein the dye stock solution is added to the small amount of the suspension culture and is incubated 15 minutes for 15 minutes at room temperature. Then this dye is excess of dye is washed with distilled water to remove the unbound dye or the excess dye. Then the dye bound dead cells are then solubilized or washed in 50% methanol with 1% SDS at 60 degrees for 30 minutes, and this process is repeated twice and pooled. The supernatant are pooled. Again it is centrifuged at 1900 G for 15 minutes. The supernatant is taken and diluted to final volume of 7 ml and the absorbance is recorded at 600 nanometer. So, higher the absorbance will indicate higher amount of the damaged cells because they attain the blue color. So, this is how you determine the viability of the cells in a suspension cultures. So, friends, this was about suspension cultures, and in the next lecture we will discuss about another technique of plant tissue culture, that is protoplast culture. Thank you.